Welcome back everyone to the continuation day 2 for our database testing tutorials. What we're going to do now is go back and look at what we did in day 1 or the first session very quickly and then continue with the second session. What we did in our first session was primarily to look at what databases are at high level, how are they important in today's software world. We started with the first project where we created a sample set of data in a notepad using for a job application or a job portal. We also saw the basics of Microsoft Excel and how we store data in Microsoft Excel sheets. In this session of day 2, what we will cover is going forward into intro into the Microsoft Access database itself. How do we create a database and how do we start adding different tables? What are the data types and primary keys all about in this? And how can we import the data that we created so far from Microsoft Excel into MS Access? Okay, now let's get into it. And to do that, first thing we're going to do is we will launch Access and let's take a look at quickly what the application looks like. So MS Access, again, just like any other latest Windows applications, has its own, not Windows, Microsoft applications. It has its different layout, the menu, and different features into it. What you could do with is to create a new database. That is our first goal, right? So just like we create a simple Microsoft Excel, it is exactly the same process. Just the power of it and what you could do further with it is how MS Access database or any database is recognized differently. All right. So you could start with a blank database or take different templates that have been used earlier, standard by you or by others. Let's focus on creating something with a very blank template, no template. So that means that we go about creating everything from scratch for that. So I'm going to select a blank database and let's say that we give this a name. I'm going to call this as ITElearn DB1. And I will put it into the folder that we will work with. That way it's easy for me to upload along with the video. So practice, and here is where I'm storing it. Now, do you see this? This is the name and save as Microsoft Access 2007 databases. That is the file format of it. Now we'll say OK. And you would notice this getting saved okay, once I say create, this database will get created and saved. You have the file here, a different kind of a icon for it, and the type and so on. If you look at without any information already stored in the database, it is already at about 300 plus kilobytes amount, that's the size. The Excel sheet, on the contrary, with limited information is at 12 kilobytes. The text document with, again, more limited with similar set of information is just 1 KB. So if you notice, the size is varying based on what type of application we're using to store the data. But you see things changing very quickly as we go into thousands of records. But at the starting, this is what it is. Now, what you see here is something similar to a Microsoft Excel in terms of the menu bar and so on. The first thing that we need to do is right now I created a ITElearn DB1, a database. A database within Microsoft Access is similar to a workbook within a Microsoft Excel. So when I create a database here, what I'm doing is I'm creating a workbook in Excel. And if you remember, we had different sheets in the Microsoft Excel, and you could talk about an employee being one sheet, a candidate being other sheet, and so on. Tables in a database are nothing but those Microsoft Excel sheets. One table per one sheet. What is a table? A table is a set of is a layout where you have rows and columns and where you could start sorting or storing sets of information or data, right? So Microsoft Excel has tables and so does Access database. Now, how did our Excel look like? I have 4 tables, employer, candidate, or 4 Excel sheets, candidate, jobs, or applications. Similarly, in my Microsoft Access, I could create different tables. Okay, so I could right click and start renaming the table or do many more features into it. Let's talk about renaming this. And well, it's open. Okay, the table is open. Let's, in fact, before I get into the renaming and other things, let's import from Microsoft Excel because I have some base data in there. Okay, so now it will become very interesting once I start the import process. So I'm going to close the Excel. I'm going to go back to the table, right click on it and say import from there, a text file, a Outlook folder, a HTML document, or an Excel. And I'm selecting Excel in this case. Now it gives me a few more options, and these are very simple options. There's a lot of English and other things into it, but do not get worried about it. The reason I'm saying is it is built to have a power of features. So our ability to use it at a base level or at a very, very detailed, complex level is in our hand. For this tutorial, to begin with, we will use it at a very base level. So I'm going to browse straight on to the folder, and I'm going to pick up the Excel itself. Once I pick up the Excel, I'm saying, hey, what? Let's import the data from that Excel into the database. The reason I'm starting with an import is you'll understand how the data will flow from here to there. Okay, and then it'll be easy for us to go about editing it from there. Now, you have three options in here. You have options to import and source data into a new table, and that is the most often used one. So create a new database table, and we will import that content from there into this table. You could also add records under one table. So if you already have a table here, you have few records, you want to append a few more records, then you could do this. But we are just importing the base data. I'm going to click on OK. Now here is where you select what you want to do next. You talk about worksheets. These are the Excel worksheets. So different worksheets is mentioned in here, and the data that is there in each worksheet is also displayed here. Row 1 has name, company email, row 2 has this, row 3 has this. So which worksheet do you want to import? Let's say that I want to include the employee worksheet. Then I'm going to click on next. And now it becomes very interesting. What is this worksheet out here? Oh, it's already being used. Okay, so I'll open it in a read-only mode. That is fine. I'm just reading it. Read only. And here, if you look at the employer data, name, company, email is also one record, in fact, in here. It is not the name of the columns. It is just happening to be the first row. But ideally, all this information here are names. All this information here are companies. All this information here are emails. Right? So this is the header of it. This is the name of the column. And these are the actual fields. Okay? These are called as the database fields. In this case, when we're importing, it is saying that, hey, do you want me to take the first row and put it as the column headings? And that will then become the field names for your table. Okay, so this will now get converted as field names. What we want to represent each column with are called as your field names. All right, columns are field names. Rows are your data record sets. Each row is one set of data or record. Now we click on next. So now what it has done is it has added the information into this. So far, the only difference we've seen is I could take the first row and convert that into the column name or field name into the database table. Now comes the second portion, and this is a great feature that differentiates our Microsoft Excel and a database. The difference is now here is how the data will get imported. There's a column and there are 4 records, no more 5 records. But for each record, it is showing you some set of information out here. Do you see? A field has a name, it has a data type, and it is something called as indexed. So we will come to this option of indexed little later, but let's look at the field name. This is the name of that specific column. Now, you should try and be as explicit as possible in creating field names. For example, if I just say that this is name, but what do you mean by name? Is it a first name or a last name or middle name, or what is it? So be very explicit in creating it. So we're going to call this as first name. That is the name of the first column. What is this of type? Will it store a number? Is it going to store a text? Will it be a data, a date, a currency, a integer, or what is it? What type of information do you wish to store out here? Since it is a name, I'll say it is a text. How about company? Is the name, and the data type is text. Okay, because the company has text itself. If I have a phone number, then probably I might use a different data type. Email is the same thing. Now, what we can do is go on to the next one. So now we have changed the type of each field or column name. This is now the most critical aspect of what databases are all about. There is a specific set of data or fields called as primary key. Primary key is the unique identification for each record in a database table. Okay, which is a database table? This entire thing is a database table. Which is a database record? Each of these rows are database records, correct? So for me to identify each record uniquely, I can add something called as a primary key. Okay, I can add and create a primary key. It can be a unique number and it can get auto-generated in a database table, or you can use something which is specific to it as ID itself. How about email? That can be unique, so that can also be used as an ID. So you have the option to create a new column or use an existing column for uniquely identifying each record or row in a database table. So let's say I will have access add the primary key, and that is what it does. If I want to choose my own primary key, then I can say is first name primary key, but you know what? There can be a lot of Steves, a lot of Kartiks and so on. That's a challenge. Can I have company name to be a primary key? Yes, but then there are so many people from the same company and it is not necessarily unique. Can I have email ID to be a primary key? Yes, because you would typically not see the same email ID being repeated for anyone else, right? So that is okay. You could use email. But in this case, let us use an ID as a primary key. Let's keep that as a primary key and say next. Now what we are doing is import to which table? From employer, which table do I want to import it to? So I could create a new table and put that name here and say finish. So finished importing from this and this, blah, blah, blah. Do you want to save this? Import steps. So these are the additional features and so on. So every time if you're frequently importing, so do you want to remember these steps so that it is easier for you to import the next set of data? I'm not doing that. I'm just putting it to close now. Now what you should see is the employer table getting created. This is the table one that was base. Now here's the employer table. Now do you see there's an ID, there is a first name, there is company, email, and so on. So to add a new record using this screen right now, there are different ways, team. You can add records and maintain records in a database. One way is to use the database table and directly add records here. You could do it using a form that is there, okay, in application on the website, or even for a database UI form, okay, where you have name and then you have a field against it, you start entering it and so on, and then that data gets captured out here. You could have it done through a query language, okay. Once we get into SQL, you could run queries and start updating, adding, deleting, and modifying records in a database directly, okay. But let's say I want to add or change here. So Steve is at apple.com, Bob is at Apple, the email ID is app.com. It's not apple.com, so I changed. Now I have changed the record in my database. I could add a new record and call this as, let's say, who else is there? We have, let's say, Karen, and Karen works with, let's say, Google, and Karen at google.com. Right. Now I've created a new record and there is an ID for it. So if I try and change the ID, I cannot do it because this is getting automatically generated. That is how we said, let's generate the ID automatically. And now we have created a new record. So you could save this database and move on. You have table one, you have employer. Now, this employer, I have seen it in a table view. There is another view called design view. Design view basically tells me at a high level how the data is going to be stored. It doesn't show me the specific records, not the data, but the different names of the field or the column names, what types they are. You could go about giving descriptions to it and see also which is a primary key and so on. All right. So look at this. Fields ID is an auto number, and you have the option to choose what you want in it. Okay, and the details for it are here. New values is always incrementing. Okay, see, you could also set a random value and so on. Different other features with it. The first name, company email is what we create. Now, what is it that we don't have? We don't have jobs, right? So nothing for jobs. What I could do is, let's say table 1 is something that I want to get into the design view. Now, here is where I start with giving it a specific name. Now, what name do I want to give to this? Jobs. Let's say OK. Now, do I want a field name for it? Yes. What should I name it? I'll call it as a job ID. Employer was a table that I imported from Microsoft Excel. Jobs are the tables that I'm creating in here. To create that, first I need to start creating fields. Now, for every job you create a specific job. You post a job. So you create a location for the job, and it is a text. Then I create a skill for the job. That is a text. And let's say you post a rate also for the job. That's a text. In fact, we already put that structure in here somewhere. Location, skill, rate. Perfect. I created exactly the same thing, right? So this is rate at $per hour. Where is the job located at? And I will also say posted by. Okay, is a text. Now what I've created is I've created a database table with these sets of information. Let me save it. This is the structure that I've given to the database, or this is the database format or template and so on. Okay. At this point, if I go into the database itself, there is nothing in it. There is a job ID. Let's say I start putting the location, Los Angeles, and skill, let's say, is selenium. Rate, let's say, $53 an hour. Okay. Posted by, I'm leaving it blank. Now, if you notice, some of these fields I'm leaving it as blank. Some I have information and so on. You have the ability to go in and say if each field is required or not. Let's say there is an additional field called additional details. Okay, this is optional. I'm not making it mandatory for a user to fill this information. See, database is all about not blindly filling information. It is giving a specific format to it. It is giving it a structure and giving you a guideline of what and how to fill and so on. So for example, when you're signing up for a new user on any website, you would notice there are mandatory fields, there are drop-down fields, and there are various other things. Where is all that information coming from? Where is it putting those things? And that is all because of this database settings. Okay, let's say this additional detail I am saying is not required. It is not required. It is optional. So I'll put it as no. But a location is a required field. It is a mandatory field. And skill is also a required field. It is also a mandatory field. And so is a rate. It is also a required field and it is a mandatory field. And can you allow zero length? Can it be 0 in length or no? Can skill be 0 in length or no? Or do you want to define how long it can be? So those types of controls becomes very important. You could also start databases with a default value. For example, additional detail is here. So I will say the default value is no details. Okay. Oh, sorry. Default value. What is this? Expression builder. So if in case you want to build an expression, we'll come to the functions portion later, but let me not put a default value for this optional text right now. So you have the ability to choose which is mandatory and which is not. Okay. So you then control how the data should be entered into the database. Okay. Now let's go back to the table view. So here you can, let's say now I enter and I try and put QTP in here, and let's say 35 is the rate posted by Karthik, and I leave this blank. You must enter a value in the jobs dot location field, and this becomes very important thing. Jobs dot location. Jobs is referring to our table itself. Location is referring to the field name or the column in it. Okay. Okay, and here you go about entering, let's say San Diego. That's the location for it. All right, and now it should be able to take it. So if you try and put information in a optional field, that is fine, but in a mandatory field, then you have to place information. So that kind of a restriction and rules is very important. So what we have done is created one table, imported one table. Let me import one more table which we created in the Excel. I'm going to go back there to that Excel, import from the source. We have already done employer. Let me do a candidate. Next, do I want the first row to become the column headings? Yes. Do I want to name this as first name? And is it text? Yes. How about skill? Is it skill itself? And is it text? Yes. Email, text is fine. Phone is a double. Automatically it saw that all are numbers, so let me take it as a double. Okay, it put it in there. Now you could talk about which type of phone. Is it a mobile phone or is it a home phone, and so on. Okay, you could decide how you want it to be given a name. Now let it access and add a primary key, or do you want to add your own primary key? Okay, so let's say in this case I will add my own primary key and say email is my primary key. And say next, candidate, and finish. So now you've imported a new table altogether. So to enter data into this, I don't have to worry about the primary key in this case. Okay, so I could go about adding a new record and say this is Sam is a .NET developer. It is C at hunter.com. Okay. Did it take the same one? Oh, okay, there you go. So you cannot enter the duplicate values into the index field. So you need to go back and change it. So only if a user has unique values into it, it can take that, because email is a primary key and phone number, whatever. Why can I not have the same phone numbers? Because what happens if you give a residence number and both, let's say, spouses or roommates living together under the same phone are accessing it? So those kind of details become important. That is where the way you design is important. Anyone can start creating tables, start creating how you want to enter and so on. But before you get there, you have to be more organized in the process of doing that. All right. So next session, we're going to look into it, and we'll continue from there. Thank you.